One of the final questions I would like to ask you, it's you've become famous, at least to me, speaking about these tensions that are most likely ignored by politicians and even professors at universities and some other people. And today we're looking at some histories is back, like to quote a really important author. And I would like to ask you, how are we able to defend ourselves if we don't even understand how the history works, or at least we don't know the details of the history, so we can't even define the enemies, the people that came here for some horrible reason, some of them. And how can we reverse this situation, considering that people don't even know the history, the politicians don't know, or if they know, they pretend they don't. So the problem today is it's like multiculturalism came in. Whoever it is, it doesn't matter if you have a historical religious purpose of, I don't know, destroying a nation or even destroying a civilization. So I would like to ask you, how can we handle in the West this type of threat, knowing that the politicians at least pretend they don't know history?
Yeah, well, this is actually a very important topic, fundamentally important, and one that's been on my mind, which is, and I touched on it earlier, the problem isn't even that they don't know history. That is a huge problem. But it's oftentimes they teach the opposite, which is even more dangerous. Okay, so in the context of what we're discussing, Islam and Europe and Christianity and Portugal, it's not even that they don't know it. They'll tell you the opposite. They'll tell you, no, it was the Muslims came peacefully and they brought civilization and literature and knowledge and wealth, and these evil bigoted Christians drove them out. Okay, so it's even much worse. And the reason they do that, it's intentional, is because if that is what I grow up believing, then yes, I should be tolerant. I should give them the benefit of the doubt. I should take them in. I should make up for the sins of my ancestors. That's the logic. Okay. And I talk just about Islam and Europe. And from what I've seen, from how I've studied it, there's what professors and scholars write. There's what popular history teaches. There's what's in the movies. And most of that is in one camp. And then there's what the sources actually say. And they are, again, increasingly so different. Okay. When I talk about professors, some are good, but a lot of them are just academic and nobody even reads them, and they're very bland. Some are, again, politically charged in the way that I just described, which is they give you the opposite explanation. If you go to, like, here in the United States, if you go to a bookstore like Barnes and Nobles and you go into the history section, let's say of the Middle East, all the books you will encounter are the books that teach that, which is that, Islam was wonderful, Europe was backwards, et cetera, et cetera. Your audience may like to know, for example, there's a professor, his name is John Esposito. He was at Georgetown. He was very popular back in the day. He's written many books. He was the editor of the Oxford History of Islam. And in one of his books, he basically says, literally verbatim, that 5 centuries of peaceful coexistence between Muslims and Christians elapsed before an imperial papal power play led to a series of so-called holy wars and centuries of mistrust and resentment from Muslims. In other words, before the First Crusade, Muslims and Christians were living in peace and tolerance. Okay. Well, the reality is actually Muslims conquered nearly 3/4 of the Christian world in the centuries before the First Crusade and destroyed tens of thousands of churches and killed and slaughtered Christians. Okay, so he doesn't tell you that, but then he tells you because the Christians responded finally, they're the bad guys. So this is what we're taught. And again, the movies, if you watch the movies, I don't know how they are in Portugal, but in America, the big budget movies, the Muslims look always tolerant. They're advanced, they're enlightened. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Christians are all crazy, backward savages. Okay. Sure. So history is being weaponized very intentionally. And I would also say, I only look and talk about the Islam question, but I believe it's happening in even more important and fundamental aspects of history. Okay. So, we have this narrative, Dark Ages, bad, suffocating Christian forces, then wonderful enlightenment. And then we learn religion is something you just don't do. And the more we do that, our society becomes wonderful and we're secular and now we're humanists and blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not working, is it? Because if you look at it, it's not working because it was never true. You see, if you actually, I believe actually the medieval era was probably the greatest era of Europe's civilization. But no one will tell you that. They'll tell you that was the darkest, most evil time. Okay, but that's again because there's an agenda behind history and how one manipulates it. Okay, and this isn't to say there's a mass conspiracy where everyone who goes and gets a PhD and writes a dissertation is intentionally lying. It doesn't work that way. What happens is once the zeitgeist, once the spirit, once the logic is in the air, then everyone conforms to it and they write and think that way because that's what you got to do. Okay, but like I said, if you objectively look at things and you study the sources and take the time to do that, you will get a very different picture. And I think that will happen when you look at different topics as well that deal with European history vis-a-vis anything. So this is a serious and a very important project. I would love it if one day there was some sort of institute dedicated to this that would actually get, top-ranked scholars of different historical fields and aspects to really go back and, reassess everything, and including by looking at the primary sources. I believe we're going to get a very different story than the one that we're constantly fed.
Yeah, and we're going to be probably more proud of it too. So we're not going to be apologizing anytime that's possible.